2 minutes of introduction, and I'm going to turn it over to Emma, who will then lead the program. First of all, the notion of internationalization of what we do in the field of education has got to be absolutely central to any educational enterprise around the world today. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, the centrality of that and the experiences that a number of us have had in the area of education, teaching, learning, research, etc. And the outcome is going to be, I hope, that we will all be better informed about what one another are doing. Because this is a very big school, 2,200 students, 1 trillion professors, 9 trillion programs. Slight exaggeration. But it feels that way sometimes, and we don't often have an opportunity to put that together. And the one sort of substantive thing I want to say is that we also need to learn how to get out of our comfort zones, whether those are domestic comfort zones or institutional comfort zones, and certainly national and international comfort zones. And the experience, I see many of our students here, of traveling overseas teaches us how to get out of our comfort zone. And that's an important element intellectually, emotionally, professionally, and so forth. The idea for this really came from my colleague here on the left, Emma, who has been, she and I have been talking about this issue for some years now. And we all felt that while there were a lot of things going on here at the Annenberg School, we really didn't have these kinds of opportunities to come together and share our experiences. And by sharing our experiences to learn, and also to promote and agitate for more international engagement. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to my colleague, who's been a real partner in advancing these ideas and providing a lot of the substance to moving forward. So, boss, I turn it over to you.
First of all, let me tell you that we have a very special guest today. At our table is Ghislaine Rennie. She is the professor of the Rhodes University in South Africa, works closely with Ernest Smith, and we are very glad to have you here. Welcome. If you have ideas, thoughts to share, you are will be very much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
We have only that many minutes for this forum. I don't want to do a lot of talking. Just not to be a sheer cheerleader for the course of internationalization of the school. I just want to mention one thing. There are more and more evidences accumulated in the world of higher education in the United States and elsewhere how important the international engagement of the students during their study years at the university and what impact this has on not only on the general, let's say, intercultural experience, awareness, and so on, but academically as well. The students who have been exposed to the trip, to the study abroad, to the international projects, and went away from their convenient zones, as Ernest said, they later on consistently have shown higher GPA, much more developed attitude and to their own career path, to the learning process, and their attitude to the curriculum and the courses and the credits which they have to take. And just to mention that there is our neighbors in UCLA, they have a center on global education which has been studying the impact of the international study abroad, international study on students' lives. And not only academic impact on study abroad is very important, but also something which I believe we as a school, especially a school of communication and journalism, we want to make on the students. It's actually what they call value impact on their lives, because the immersion in the other countries' life fabric makes them students. It's self-reported. The survey has been made on of 25 universities, American universities, including the Prime University, Harvard, of course, Pennsylvania, Stanford, and so on. The students report that it makes them more motivated to study out of the box, change, modify their selection of the courses, self-reported personal growth, maturity, independence, cultural sophistication, awareness of international issues, self-confidence, and what is also very important, flexibility and adaptability. So we have a very well established international program at the school, and our faculty are doing wonderful things. And we sometimes have a glimpse in the media here or there, but I think it's very important that we firsthand learn about the experiences. They share our thoughts about what's good and what's bad, what's difficult, what is beneficial, and we all together reflect what it takes, and if we are really inspired, encouraged to go with more interest and more engagement, both on the side of faculty and students into this issue. So we start the conversation with Erna Smith, who during the several years already has been, she's doing the study abroad program with students from
Yes, in Cape Town, South Africa, and this is part of the existing international programs in the Annenberg School. So issues of logistics and things of this sort, Matthew can speak more to that than I can. I just want to talk about what I've seen in the 5 years I've been doing it that's been, I think, effective in terms of what Ernie calls the kind of the invisible curriculum, kind of for lack of better words, a kind of character building sort of side of things that happens. The students do internships and they learn within their internships. But in terms of experiences that we do together, I found that what has been the single most popular feature every single time is a workshop that we do in a city called Falls, South Africa. It's about 45 minutes outside of Cape Town. We've been working with the same group of young people at this community center now for 50 years. And this experience sort of arose out of my own experiences starting off in journalism education. I actually started off as a journalist working in high school workshops with students getting interested in journalism. And there's a great desire in South Africa, the population is quite young, for people to express themselves. They have community media, that's the third tier within the government. So we started working with people there, and what happens is that we're now working with the same kids now 3 years in a row. They have grown up, so they're no longer teenagers. They're actually can be peer groups, so they can kind of all go and hang out together. But what I've seen in that is this wonderful exchange that happens. An exchange, obviously, for us of skills, But then the most important thing is what comes back to the student, which is what the insight they gain into the country from the point of view of, to me, the average person in South Africa who is younger, who is not connected to the government, who's just sort of out there trying to make it, this generation that was born after apartheid. So the insight that comes from working with these youngsters into the culture has been phenomenal. And the second aspect of it that we sort of added last year that seems to be working quite well was language lessons. It never really occurred to me to try to be, the languages are very complicated. There's 11 official languages. They click. It's difficult. But just what I found with the language lessons was it was actually an insight, it makes sense, into the culture. And the way that we were taught language was really as much about respect as it was about the words that you used. And in learning that, then the students were better able in their work to actually be appropriate and get responses from people that they might not have ordinarily gotten. This particular project has grown and developed in interesting ways. The city now actually provides funding for this program. It's an annual program now there. So they provide some funding. We're doing this year, last year we did a project with the community radio station there, and we did actually, PR students did a strategic plan for this radio station to sort of incorporate more youth programming into it. I don't know if they're following the recommendations, but we will find out this year when we're actually, our assignment is actually to produce 30 minutes of 30-minute, youth magazine for this local radio station. So these partnerships, as they develop and they grow, and you watch people in it, both the students and the learners from South Africa, has been, I think, the single most effective bit of that curriculum. More so to me than even working in their internships. Because, again, of what they understand about the culture. They go and they live. This year, I'm making the students live with the learners, so that'll be fun for everybody. But the exchange back and forth has been invaluable. Last year, the community, just to give you an idea of how they've supported this project, we had this interesting session in drumming lessons. I wasn't expecting drumming. And so the South Africans who didn't know each other, they start on the drum, they can sing their national anthem in perfect harmony and on the beat. Ours started up. Our national anthem is not exactly rhythmic. But they absolutely did their best, and the South Africans said, well, you win. That's absolutely the worst rendition of the South African we ever heard, but they give us a lot of credit for it. There was a sort of an opening that happens in those moments when it's not about, asking a question or, appearing to be the smart one to someone else. It's just that one-on-one kind of exchange of this subtle insights that people suddenly have that makes their work afterwards then just pop and come alive. My feedback from supervisors is that they're kind of different after that. They seem to be a little bit more savvy, a little bit more understanding of what's going on. But I do know that it seems to be the single thing that they don't forget. And the friendships on Facebook now, all the kids that seem to know each other. So it continues. So I don't know what other people are doing in programs, but I find that type of an immersion where they're using their skills and going deeper into the community has been the single most, to me, impactful part of this program. And that's what all I have to say.
Maybe you also tell us how many people were in students?
Yes, over the years, first year I did, there was 3 students. I've gone up to 16. So I average about, I'd say about 10. About 10.
Is growing.
Pardon me?
Interest is growing.
Interest, I think interest this year probably in all the programs a little bit down, but it has been growing in that particular program, growing a lot. And I think it's because, South Africa, if you're interested in writing about issues of social justice or any type of inequality, it's right there for you. And to me, the success of the program is what happens when the student comes back. And I found that people tend to be a bit more interested in those same issues in this country when they come back. Because the great value to me of going abroad is actually what it teaches you about your own backyard. That's the potential of it. And here we are, literally sitting, on the edge of a great economic divide, sitting here in this university. In that country, it's in your face all the time. You cannot come back here and act like you don't understand that anymore. I think people do tend to understand that. I've seen students, really kind of change their whole focus into those particular sorts of areas. Because to make it a big story in the world, there's always who has and who doesn't, and what's the relationship between the two sides. And I think that's been, to me, the single greatest value of the South African program is because those issues are so in your face there. You cannot avoid thinking about it. And here, we can. And so when they come back, they look at this country, I think, a lot different.
Emma, can I just ask, actually it's more of a leading question for you, Erna, but typically when these programs began maybe 10, 12 years ago, they were journalism and public relations master's students. We've seen an expansion into other master's students from other master's programs. Can you talk a bit about the impact of...
I've always have, thank you for reminding me of that, because what I found is that South Africa is a great place for students across the disciplines in the school. I've had communication management people placing them in public relations type internships works out quite well. Actually, it's kind of interesting how they are, because even in class they're kind of different. You have a prep class, they ask questions about money. What's the money behind it? Journalism students will ask about some craft issue, but it's comm manager always like, well, what's the money behind it? And so it's interesting conversation they have. It's quite different. And then this year I have public diplomacy students. I could have used them last year. We have a relationship now with the U.S. consulate there, and they actually have two. They have internships they set aside just for us, and we don't have to go through the State Department. We go directly to them. So there's none of this big, check. So I think that it's an incredible place for across the majors here, not just in journalism, not just in PR, public diplomacy, comm management. There's just a lot that one can do there. And I would like to add something, because we have Manuel here. Last year, Manuel, I was at University of Cape Town, and I have a friend who has a daughter who goes to school there. And you spoke there, and she shows me this article and says, do you know him? Like, you're a rock star. Yes, actually, I do know Manuel. So they're reading his work in the communication school, and they think he's a rock star.
Yeah, so when our speakers speak, you will see that there are a variety of forms and approaches, and Diane will tell us her experience and her model.
Okay. In this hand you have the Greek debt crisis, the different Muslim factions in Egypt, and the terrible corruption in India. In this hand you have Peyton Manning, Lindsay Lohan, and Oprah Winfrey. Which hand do you think the students are going to grasp in this school? I'm putting my money on this hand, and my challenge is to get them to take this hand and think about the role of international relations and religion in politics, and why that should be as important, if not more important, than what's happening in entertainment and sports media. Not that I'm not a big fan of entertainment and sports, it's just that I think that there's a lot more going on in the world that we need to be informed about if we're going to be contributing, participating citizens in the 21st century. Now, to compound my problems, not only am I interested in international relations, I'm interested in religion. Now, I know religion is like, I can't roll my eyes for all of you, but it's sort of like, oh, God, what do we have to do now? The truth of the matter is, you cannot be an informed person in the 21st century unless you know something about religion. I'm not talking about knowing the catechism or knowing how to recite the Kaddish. I'm talking about understanding why Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism make a very big difference in terms of society, culture, and politics. You can't cover the Middle East unless you know something about Islam. You can't cover Asia unless you know something about Buddhism and Hinduism. And you're lost in this country unless you understand Christianity. So when I talk about religion, yes, I can see people kind of lolling off. But the truth of the matter is that you need to know something about religion if you want to report going forward. You know what? Even if you do want to cover sports and entertainment, Tim Tebow and Ashton Kutcher and all those Kabbalah people have proved my point that you still need religion to do that. What I've tried to do is take the carrot approach rather than the stick. And that means I invite students to take my course, Journalism 585, which includes an all-paid trip abroad during spring break. For the first 2 years, we went to Israel and Palestine, and this year we went to India. Now, as Adriana can tell you, because she's in my class this year, this is not quite the free lunch it sounds like. In order to get prepared for this trip, you need to know a lot about the history, background, and culture of the country we're going into. So to try to get India in 2 months is such an impossibility that even I have to set my standards a little lower. But what we do is we spend time doing a lot of reading and also going out into the local community. Now this is a virtue of doing religion if you're in LA. LA is the best city in the country for religious diversity. We have more Muslims here than I think anywhere outside of Detroit perhaps. We have, one of the largest South Asian communities. We have more Mormons here than anywhere outside of Salt Lake. We have one of the largest Jewish communities. We have the largest Catholic community. It's just a fabulous place to do it. So for 2 months, I asked my students to report on the local Hindu and other South Asian communities. I also bring in a lot of guest speakers to help them understand Indian culture and society, because you can't understand religion. Yeah, you can. You can understand religion as an entity in itself, but to me that's very boring. I prefer to see it as part of the social and political mix, and so that's what we do. I have to say, going to India was the biggest challenge I've ever had in my life. It was unlike anything I've ever done before. I've been to China, I've been to the Middle East, I've been to Europe, I've been to South America. India was something unto itself. And whereas maybe because I was also worried about the 10 students and what was going to happen to them, I looked at it a little differently than they did, because to me it was really difficult. To them it was transformational. And I think it was transformational because, as Ernest said, they experienced extremes in ways that we just don't in this country. We spent one morning in the Shahabad dairy slum, looking at trenches where people piss and shit in the ground, looking at places where people have 10 square feet with that much to themselves. We went from there to a 5-star hotel where we were treated to a beautiful brunch, where every kind of delicacy you could want was given to you. In that kind, we were sitting in Mercedes, driving around with people, and on the, window are knocking little children who are emaciated, asking for a rupee, and you don't know whether to roll your window down and start giving money to everybody, or whether, you just drive by. The extremes in India are incredible. And not only did we see those economic extremes, we got to meet people who were inspirational in their own ways. We spoke to Indian feminists. We spoke to some politicians. We spoke to journalists. We had, for a week, for 9 days of being there, we were able to see a lot more about this society than we could have from reading books here for another 3 months, which isn't to say the books weren't important. We wouldn't have understood as much as we did had we not had the background, but being there made all the difference. Now, the students did a lot of work when they were there. I feel really strongly that if you're writing, you're publishing, and you're not doing this for my benefit or for your own benefit, you're doing this so other people can read your work and be changed by it. So one thing I insist on is everything that they do gets published. So far we've had great success. We've been back 2 weeks, we've had stories in Global Post, we've had stories in Religion Dispatches, we have things that are going into Christian Science Monitor in the LA Times, and this will keep on going for a couple of more months as things come out. So, and now that students are back, I think they look at reporting in the local community, which we're going to do for the next one, totally differently. They have a whole different way of sizing up the issues, of speaking to people, of being able to relate to diaspora communities about the home community. And ultimately, I think it's going to change what they think about their careers. This is the 3rd time I've done this. I've done this with about 35 students. And some of them have gone on to cover international relations, to seek advanced degrees in this area, to really change what they thought they were going to do in their lives. I had former sports reporters and entertainment reporters who have, forsworn those interests and are now doing politics and hard news. I think that, sports is great, entertainment is great, but this is more important. This is more important. So I don't know if these kinds of transformations could have happened here. I think that, yes, it's important to go to marginalized communities here, and if I don't have money to do this again abroad, I will take them to Detroit, or I will take them someplace in America, where Appalachia, someplace where we can have a similar experience. I do think, though, that with the shrinkage of international coverage in the mainstream media, we do a service to other people by providing it and seeing that our coverage is mainstreamed as well. And I feel really lucky that I've gotten the support of the school. One more quick thing. It's not like I am a magic person who somehow gets money. I go out and work for the money I get. And I raise the money. Every teacher, every professor can do the same thing I do. You write a grant proposal, you find individuals who can support you. We're not talking about tremendous amounts of money. It costs maybe $35,000 to take 13 of us to India. Yes, it's more than most of us can afford on our own, but it's not unreasonable to get a donor to provide that or to get a grant for that. Anyone can do this. You don't have to, I don't have any special secret knowledge. Anyone can do this. And there are other models. Maybe, a different model is asking students to contribute some of the money. I've tried not to do that because I don't want money to be a factor in whether students join me or not. But maybe it has to be at some point. Maybe the problems without passports is another model. I think we need to be creative, but I don't think money should be the, issue as to whether or not you do this. We do this on the cheap. We've stayed in, less than fancy hotels. It's very plain. You don't eat a lot, You're not living high. I'm sure there's students live much better here than they do when they're traveling with me. But they don't care. They don't care because they're getting something very, very exciting and different and transformative.
Thank you, Diane. And it's very, very important what you're saying. While preparing these forums, I was talking to a lot of people, and someone came up with an argument, kind of which puts in doubt the necessity of such an effort. And it's a concept or approach which is called global is local, arguing that Los Angeles is already such a place that it's just you can have here, the world is here. So why to go so far away? Because they are real communities with real lives and problems and whatever. You just can do that. So what do you think about it?
I think the global is local in some ways, but I think in other ways the global is not local. So in other words, yes, you can understand Hinduism and you can understand how Hinduism functions in society by looking at the community here. But the community here is not representative of that in India. It's a wealthier community, it's a less Hindu community, it's a more conservative community. You can understand basic issues, in other words, but you can't understand the extremes that make up India. Most of the Hindu community here are not living in slums, They're not pissing in the street. They're not knocking on your car window. I mean, to really understand and also, they are living in this country, so they're not living in a country with the particular system that is India. India's government is different than our government. His social problems are different than our social problems. So the global is local insofar as, yes, we have Indians here and we can begin to understand their issues here. But what makes India India and the experience of how religion and politics intersect there can't be understood here. And not least of all because this is basically, for all intents and purposes, still a Christian country. India is a Hindu country. It's impossible I think that was the most revelatory thing for students, to really be in a culture that was not a Christian culture, where the basic, fundamental understandings that you kind of take for granted here are so very different. And that's why, thank God, the global is not local, because everything is not McDonald's yet.
I would say that the global is local, that there are many different locals.
Yes.
It's probably also worth adding that India has more Muslims than almost any other country in the world.
There's the
So
second largest number of Muslims.
Despite being
Yeah.
Hindu, it's also very Muslim,
Yeah. Yeah.
which you also don't appreciate from here.
Right. Right. And India has, and I think it has the most Sikhs of any country in the world.
Absolutely.
And the most
Yeah,
Jains.
180
Yeah. So,
million Muslims.
right. So to be in a culture not only that's predominantly Hindu, but where Muslims, Sikhs, and Jains, which are barely registered here, are predominant, and their issues come to the fore is fascinating.
Thank you. And we move forward. I just want to, like an intermediate piece of information, remind you that we are educating our students for eventually life and work, basically, in a very global world. And job marking is changing dramatically. If it was enough to have before, if it had been enough before to have a list of skills, list of credits, courses taken, and professional credentials of academic type, more and more our students, while looking for a job, will be facing the challenge, which they, so far as I understand, cannot meet right now, which is being exposed and having some international experience. Not only different medias, but different parts of the world. And so we really should feel responsible for them to be prepared.
You know, the feedback is that always, I'm sure, Diane, you get the same thing, that this, having had this experience is a conversation starter with most potential employers. So they stand out just with having this on the resume.
We moved to Sandy Tolan, who agreed to tell us about his experience, which he had with while during his work at the School of Journalism at UC Berkeley. And it was very kind of interesting for me to talk to him because UC Berkeley, it's a public school, and you know that they never had and could not even dream of the wealth of resources which this place has. So I was asking Sandy when we were talking, so why and how was it possible that during so many years he was able to organize so many reporting trips to different countries with the students at the university, which is a public school?
Happy to talk about that. I mean, and I really just want to echo some of what my colleagues have said without repeating everything. And just the whole idea of getting out of your comfort zone, the adaptability, the flexibility, the empathy that you develop for being in someone else, not being in their skin, but understanding how someone else lives, and the appreciation you also sometimes bring back. You see somebody complaining about, you know, their luggage hasn't come off the cart, and you're like, you know, excuse me.
No internet.
Yeah. So there's a depth, there's a sort of appreciation of how other people live. And I would, and Erna used the word respect, and it's the one thing I try to tell students internationally that they're traveling. There's nothing more important. It doesn't mean you ask all soft questions, but there's really nothing more important. And I think it's one of the things that's conveyed as a value, a human value, as well as a journalistic value, is respect and appreciation, which is sort of the same, other side of the same coin. So I want to talk a little bit about how we did it at Berkeley. I mean, I taught half a dozen or so international trips. We did and I was part of an environment that was started by other colleagues. Libby Chavez, Orville Schell was the dean at the time, and others. There was a real facilitation of this. There was a real interest, a sort of outward focus, which is what we're talking about here as well. We did more of the design of what Diane has just described rather than say what Erna described. We were doing, my classes, we did a lot of parachuting, which is not necessarily the best way to describe international journalism, but to be honest, we didn't go live somewhere. But what we did in many cases, sometimes I traveled with them, sometimes I didn't, is we studied something for months. Sometimes we did it in 1 semester, sometimes 2 semesters, sometimes 1.5. Actually, we ended spring break in the spring semester, obviously. So we did a class on oil development in Latin America and the environmental, political, social effects. And we sent to 5 countries in Latin America. But we had a whole seminar of people, experts in the oil industry, environmentalists, economists, who came from other parts of the country, from Texas, from California, an executive of Chevron right down the street from us. And we read this poem called The Prize that they only admitted to me later, they didn't read the whole thing, but Daniel Yergin's book. But they just read so much, and to this day, a lot of them are working. One of them worked with the Wall Street Journal. There are a number of them that are working with as experts on energy. So that's talking about sort of a practical way. But in that class, in a class that I taught on the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, that we called Transitions to What? Because everyone was saying it's transition, but what is it a transition to? And in a class that I taught on the early signs of climate change, it was all about focusing on a specific issue and really learning that issue. So in that sense, it's a seminar on journalism and learning how to be a reporter. And the international stuff almost at the beginning, it just comes in addition to doing really good hard-nosed reporting. And then every week they would do their I would drive them crazy because every single work they had a reporting plan due. And then I would start telling them, all right, what are the cultural appreciations you're getting from this place? But they had to go through steps in each week to show that they were ready to go. And in some cases, I'll give the climate change class as an example. I actually was reading a book review by Al Gore in the New York Times book review about 7 or 8 years ago, and all of a sudden I thought, are there any early signs of the impact on human beings? This was before a lot of the reporting we've had recently. And so I thought, what if we just got a bunch of people students together to investigate that? And I walked into Dean Shell's office and said, I want to do this. And I had already had somewhat of a track record in the school. I had a track record of doing this kind of class, international class. And he said, well, how much do you need? I said, I think we could travel for $30,000. He was making rain at the time. The economy was a little different than it is now. But he said, okay. And so then he comes to me and goes, would you like to have a climatologist to teach the class with you? A Berkeley climatologist. And I said, yeah, I think that would probably be helpful. I'm not exactly an expert on the science of it. So this guy named John Hart and I, he would come every week, and we would vet the journalism, we would vet the science, and we'd have this full series of people to come in. Meanwhile, they're doing their reporting plans. I had a couple of reporters say, I really want to go. I want to go to Africa and look at Lake Tanganyika and the impact of the rise in temperature of the lake on something called a daga, which is like a little sardine. And this was after weeks and weeks of vetting. Well, this doesn't work, and John Hart was vetting these stories. So they ended up with, I think there was 11 reporters. They went to 7 different countries. And I didn't go on the trips at all because, first of all, it would have been impossible since they were going just in a period of about 10 days or 2 weeks to these 7 different countries. But what we did do is we made sure that they were as ready as you could possibly be, that they traveled in teams, that they each did their own story backed up by someone else that was geographically, obviously, close to each other, and that they had backup locally so that individual experts, people who we call fixers or translators would be meeting with them where there were language issues, And so that, you know, the key to a lot of all these values that my colleagues have been talking about, I couldn't agree more, but they came through the specific preparation that everyone did. And Diane, you know, I know you're doing that in your classwork, and Erna too. I mean, we have to prepare them. But these were very, very specific stories. Of course, they change once you get on the ground, and we talked about what happens, you know, when the story changes. One other thing that we've tried, and I would love to do again sometime, because it was more towards the spirit of collaboration. There is a model about the American reporter going overseas, seeing something. You know, you try to be as sensitive and aware and respectful as possible, but you can't entirely abandon your own perspectives. Not necessarily, you shouldn't necessarily entirely. But we wanted to try something a little different once, so. We worked, there's a group in Prague called Transitions Online, which are journalists, and their coverage is of the transitions, the countries in transition after communism. They have 40 correspondents, or at the time they had 40 correspondents all around Eastern Europe. And I was in Bulgaria doing some reporting on something unrelated, and I saw somebody going through the trash, an old man going through the trash, and I asked my colleague, would that have happened in communism? She was no fan of communism, but she said, no way. This would not have been the case in communism. So I started thinking, what? So she said, but this is a transition. To what? Is it a transition? And so then all of a sudden I thought, transitions to what? So there's a group called Transitions Online, and she wrote for them. So I started talking with them, and then what we ended up doing is our 11 reporters met up, first virtually and then in person in Prague, with 11 reporters who came to the Transitions Online headquarters. And so they did 11 different reports on different aspects of the transition as two-person reporting teams, where the local person was, you know, not really a fixer, but someone who was a guide and was a co-writer and byline. And we brought our resources and some of our additional reporting. So I don't want to go on too much longer because I know there's other colleagues that want to speak, but I guess I just want to emphasize that as much as possible, you know, these values that and the skills that are developed and the eyes that are open and all those things that my colleagues were saying, I couldn't agree more with. And as we can imagine what might be possible here, and what's already happening here to a large extent, it's through that real specific preparation of getting people ready to be as confident as they possibly can be, and also as open to what might happen. Stop.
Thank you, Sandy. And talking about transition, there is one more operation which is being prepared now at the schools. And Roberto agreed to talk about this, although his first kind of response was that no, it hasn't happened yet, and I don't know if it will be happening, if it will be successful, but that's exactly very interesting, where you are in the stage of preparation of your puberty, together with the University of Havana, and the topic, the project is exactly transition.
Yeah, I mean, where I am in the planning is edging back from panic periodically, several times a day, but actually it's coming together pretty well. This is a course that's going to be taught in the 5 weeks following the end of the spring term. It's borrowing a model for an international course that the college uses a lot, of a very intense, short, full-time summer program. Their Problems Without Passports series uses that a lot. They have other courses that are modeled the same way. It has a couple of advantages. One, that you can be opportunistic. And in this case, there was a change in policy in both governments that allows this kind of trip to happen for students for the first time. And I'm maybe ever, but certainly in the last 10 or 15 years, it's possible to take a student group for a short trip. They previously, you had to go for a full semester, and there are full semester programs that have been operating in Havana for some time, but it wasn't possible to go for a short trip like this. So that opened up the possibility of a model that you can do something as a one-off or two-off or three-off, or you can do, the college does a great many of these, and sometimes they're repeated and sometimes they're not. You really can take advantage of circumstances because of the short format. The other purpose of using this, the other sort of larger agenda behind this is as a course that very deliberately is aimed at converging across the whole of Annenberg. And so there are 10 students, and Matthew, I've lost track exactly, but there are 2 journalism undergraduates, there are 2 specialized journalism, there are 2 or 3, there are 2 or 3 public diplomacy, there's 1 or 2 comm management, I think there's a comm undergraduate, and there are 2 regular journalism grad students. So it's the students were actually picked to create this a really mixed class, and that's possible because also borrowing the model that has been developed in the Problems Without Passports courses. It's project-based and very intense. The idea is you're taking on a subject, hitting it hard, and completing the entire course of study over a short period of time. So there's a preparation period of 2 weeks of classes here. Then we go to Washington for a day of briefings, to Miami for a day of briefings, and then spend 10 days in Havana, come back, they write their final projects, and it's over. The other form of convergence is there's a parallel course being taught in the college, International Relations, that has fairly different substance. That's focusing on U.S.-Cuban relations. It happens to be taught by my wife, and the advantage, aside from being able to do this together on a personal basis, is that there's an economy of scale in terms of making all the arrangements, which have now taken almost a year. So it made sense to try and get the most bang for the work that's going to go on into setting it up. And there's more sort of a broader base of institutional support for it. The subject of the course is very much what Sandy was talking about. It's a case study in a transitional regime, trying to understand the relationship between political, economic, and social change. So the coursework ahead of time will be a very quick, deep study on Cuba, but also in the literature of transition and international relations and political science and some of the journalism of transition. And now I'm going to look for transitions online, and your project and lots of other. There are many. It's a global phenomenon. The idea is to use Cuba as a case study of this much bigger kind of phenomenon, and to try and relate what we see in Cuba, where there's a big economic transition going on. There will be a political transition when biology takes its course, and the question is what kind of a social transition is going on. All these things are anybody's guess at this point. So that gives it a very specific architecture. It's not just a trip to Cuba. But it is a trip that is very clearly focused on one theme. There's a specific research question which everybody is going to answer, and all the preparation will be like you have received an assignment. Here's the assignment. We're going to get background on it. We're going to do interviews. We're going to go do some briefings, some other briefings in Miami, hit the ground, do the reporting, and get out. There are any number of interesting twists that are, part of the educational opportunity is operating in a totalitarian country, which has lots of, for all of us who've done it, brings all kinds of interesting challenges in of itself. In this case, just setting up being able to bring 20 students there has required creating a collaboration with the University of Atlanta, which is actually working out quite well, and it's going to be interesting. And we're going to have access to professors and students there, and they're going to help us arrange visits and do outings, and then you have to very carefully kind of figure out what you do on your own. So as not to get an early trip to the airport. And with 20 students, this is going to be really interesting. So it turns out to be a 2-day trip. That's the kind of thing that happens. But we're hoping not to get PNG before we get the work done. And the other constraint, the short time period has advantages. But it also means you really don't have that much. You really have not that much time on the ground, nor that much time to get background. It's for the students. It's going to be a full-time experience for 5 weeks. I'm hoping they're really not planning on doing much else. But certainly, well, for the last 2 weeks of it, it's full-time. The 2 weeks we're on the road are programmed from dawn to past bedtime. And the 2 weeks here are going to be quite full. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, good luck with that.
The other people keep saying that to us. Yeah, they keep telling us that and the mix of students is going to be really interesting.
Very advanced.
Yeah, there's like about a 10-year age range, I think, among the students. Not quite, maybe 8 years.
I was curious what kind of assignments you're going to do with a sort of mixed disciplines.
Well, they're going to be discipline specific. So ranging from works of journalism to policy memos to research papers, but all basically on the same topics. So I have to, and that's going to be really interesting because they're going to do all of that work. I'm getting them back to the Miami airport on a Sunday morning, and then they're on their own. And that's when they're going to produce the final work. It's very much unlike the model that Diane has, or what you were describing, where you then spend a lot of time elaborating the product afterwards. It's one of the constraints of doing the summer model, because you can attract students, but they need to then go off and do internships, do summer jobs, do all that kind of stuff.
Can I ask a question? Should this be required of all Annenberg students?
Please.
I think so. Other colleges are doing it.
Yeah.
That's not the constraint. The constraint is providing the program and supporting it.
Feels like a constraint on money to me.
Well, I was going to put it back crudely.
But many, as we see from Diane and Sandy, what they were talking about, these are not really serious money for this place.
But then when you roll in every student like most,
Well,
One thing I'd like to
development office also could work on this, and I'm sure if we know how to sell this idea, money can.
I like the idea of requiring everyone to go overseas. However, the capacity that you have to have for, as my colleagues here well know, the amount of work it takes to get the students ready, and this is no criticism of students, anybody ready, any skilled reporter ready to go to a place they've never gone before, and to learn so that you're not going in there and saying, I knew a journalist in Pakistan who said that he had an American reporter come to him and say, "Can you take me to the terrorist neighborhood?" The corner of Jihad and Al Qaeda. These are people who are skilled. You want the cultural context, and the amount of work it takes is immense. To do more than one of those classes a year
takes a huge. I think
logistically,
in terms of compared to teaching a regular 4-unit course here, it's easily 2 to 3 times as much work.
I found that
Because you have to-
even working with Matthew, because of a part of the world I'm in, it's all personal. It's a lot of personal relationships. And so you can't just phone it in. You have to go and meet people, and you have to build up these relationships. But even with support, it is labor intensive, but I found it to be the most enjoyable work I've ever done. I have to add that. So it doesn't, it's a lot of work, but it's also a big reward, if you ask me.
It's also possible that if we found ways to work together,
Yes.
you know, and think intelligently about how we're organized, we can help each other. So, and I've said this before, there are groups of us with expertise in the Middle East, there are groups of us with expertise in Latin America. I mean, there's plenty of people throughout the university who can come in and help. So, I mean, all...
One Lebanese fixer could cover half the world.
Pardon me?
One good Lebanese fixer could cover
Half the world. So I think it's possible to do. It's just that there'd be need to be a commitment not only of money but of also time and resources.
Yeah, but as always, enthusiasm is a good driver, but it's not enough. It's not enough. It has to be acknowledged, it has to be appreciated, and somehow counted. So that's why I'm looking for the team that who, if not him, could, I don't know, we could think about it. How we make it not a hobby, but an important, recognized activity.
I mean, Marshall does it, the college does it. I mean,
There are
lots
ways-
of people at USC have
That's what.
In cafes of Marshall,
I
there's kids
asked
who pay,
Matthew
but-
actually to tell us where we are on the map of the USC.
The Marshall School, to the best of my knowledge, is requiring every freshman to go overseas during spring break. My impression of that, if there's any Marshall people here, is that it's one faculty member on a bus with 43 students doing a bit of a bus tour of Hong Kong or Shanghai. I don't know if that's the model we want to aim for.
It is,
It is or it isn't?
It is not.
It's
I mean,
not.
I don't think so at all.
Can I just say, well,
And
I'm
what
going
else?
Get 'em on the
to
phone.
dash off to my next meeting.
Am I on that meeting too?
Probably. I'm just told to go to meetings.
That's the director.
But I do want to thank Emma for putting this together. I really do want to thank her for doing this. I would suggest perhaps that for those of you who have done this kind of work, it would make sense to maybe have another meeting. A discussion about what you've learned in common, about what would the future of these kinds of programs look like at the Annenberg School. Is there a Marshall model? Is there another model? What are the pedagogical implications? What are the staffing implications? It doesn't have to get to that level of detail, but I think it would be helpful to go to the next level, next step, is to figure out where we go next.
I think it could be.
I'm going to leave it in your good hands.
I had to go myself. But, Diane, you were talking about doing something maybe something.
I mean, now you're doing the summer. What's the possibility, like we would
I think after going to India, I'm
full
not-
semester?
Wow. Gotta get through the summer.
I mean, I think what I think if I get money again, I think I would be in the